Hello, hello. It's iBookBinding's not live today, and we have Zeenat Azmi joining us today. Hello, hi. How are you?
Hi, nice to Fine, fine. I'm really excited to be on the podcast. I mean, I reached out to you so because I thought it was worth sharing our little world here. But I'm a
Yeah,
big fan of the podcast. It's really fascinating. Yeah. Thank
yeah.
you.
Thank you for that. And I think you wrote to me about Islam from Egypt, this bookbinder. And I'm Stefan. I'm in Windsor, United Kingdom, and Pavel joins us from Belgrade, from Serbia. Hi, Pavel.
Hi.
So
Oh,
usually we start with just some background of our guests. How did you start making books? Why did you choose this crafts, and what do you do in general?
okay.
And maybe you could just start, maybe you could just start by saying where you are, because Eritrea is a country that has more than one place in it. Where are you?
Okay, yeah, and a lot of people haven't even heard of Eritrea, to be honest. Like, even at the airport, it will be like, "Oh, you're from Eritrea? Where is that?" So, it's a, I'm living in Eritrea, in Asmara, the capital, for about 5 years now. Before that, I was living in Sudan, so next door. So it's a small country on the in East Africa, kind of on the Red Sea. And I mean, the reason we came here was mostly because of my husband's work. He works for the UN, so we move around a lot. Yeah, but I was lucky enough that the environment here is a really like artisanal, creative one, and it was a really amazing opportunity that I found here for myself, especially in the bookbinding. So just down the road from my house is like a wonderful bookbinding school that does an intensive 2-year daily course in bookbinding in the Italian tradition. So, you know, this was my pandemic basically, was bookbinding at the school there.
Do they have a website? Can we link post a link to them when we publish this video?
Yeah, the mission, it's an Italian mission, Catholic one, the Pavoni mission. So the Pavonians in Italy, they have a website. They have a long tradition of doing bookbinding among other vocational training around the world. So I think in some Latin American countries, or Mexico maybe, I think in Botswana. So they have a few of these kind of institutions around, and bookbinding has been one of their core like areas since I don't know, the mid 1700s or something. So it's a long tradition.
And we should probably explain that it's not that strange, not at all strange, to find an Italian mission in Eritrea. Asmara itself is a city that is best probably known as the city of modernist architecture built by Italians in early 20th century, and still Italian is widely spoken in the country, from what I understand.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a really unique space where if you go outside, a lot of Italian visitors, they will feel like they're still in Italy. It's like a little, a little bubble of, kind of Italian culture and a lot of Italian influence that is still there today. And even the course that I was taking, then it was taught primarily in Italian by an Italian master until about 10 years ago. So even the teachers would have used Italian as a language of instruction. So it's not something that's like a remote colonial past so much as quite a like present within, especially within certain vocations.
I wanted to mention that while that's a recorded video, we'll be glad to see any comments near the video or under the video. If you can post from where you're joining us, that will be nice. We're always happy to see people from all over the world joining the conversation and podcasts or live streams. But also, if you have any questions to Zeenat or to us, please post them, and we'll try to either pass them and try to answer them during the premiere of this video, or maybe later in the comments or in a separate video. So please post your questions anyway, and we'll see how it goes from now on. Pavel?
And Zeenat, why did you decide to start bookbinding? You do have some background in craft. I saw some other projects related to textiles and leather, I think, on your Instagram.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've always been interested in kind of like bookish crafts, if you like. Like I kind of had to choose my path with my studies. I did linguistics for my undergrad, and then I was going to do like, you know, information studies and work in libraries and this side of thing. But I followed a different track into international development and humanitarian work, and like as a professional, well, at least the intention. But the textiles is also like a very big part of my heritage. Like my father has a knitwear factory, or had one, in like one of the old Victorian mills in Manchester. So we grew up among these kind of, you know, old textile spaces with bales of yarn around and fling them around as like our little pets or something. I have an aunt who's also like a textile artist. He works with a lot of vulnerable women in Manchester, doing kind of going into South Asian heritage and like bringing that out and representing it. So, you know, I have had those kind of influences. I made this, let me show you an example. So before I got into bookbinding, I think I just kind of on a whim decided to make this blanket, which is kind of like a bookshelf. So I guess there's a little bit of like book design. I think I have some like slight kind of, I don't know,
That's
leather
nice.
tooling in here as well, I think.
Yeah.
Kind of faded out. But
Oh, even some tooling.
And like even like Arabic ones. I don't know, like a lot of like selvages to do like the these are like the designers of the fabric, but I use them to do the titles. It was supposed to be an Alice in Wonderland theme, so it has pockets where it's like, eat me to keep your chocolate while you're reading. Anyway.
This is so nice.
I had like it's for my son, right? I had like shadow puppets in one of the pockets, so while we're reading a story together, they can like reenact them on the wall. And like this was a miniature bookshelf within the bookshelf where I kept like these miniature books. So then I made miniature books, you see, like these kind of little things with pages in them. And even then later I carried on like so, like Harry Potter miniature books. So yeah, there was like playing around with the idea of it like at an earlier stage. Then as I started learning, my miniature books also became a bit more sophisticated with pages inside and bookmarks and this like little girdle book with like hieroglyphic stamps. So
okay, that's one of our favorite formats on this podcast.
That's the first one for us. We've seen girdle books before, but a miniature girdle book that we haven't seen yet. But I know you've made a full scale one. Yeah.
Yeah, so I had to make the matching thing. I don't know, maybe it was like a childhood love of Harry Potter that you go into those kind of things.
And speaking of miniature books, I saw a really cool post on your Instagram where the Witcher is sitting on a book and reading a miniature book.
Yeah, I think it was this one, The History of Magic. I wrote a little like poetic extract, which I absolutely cannot read, but it's from, you know, at the beginning of the books, I have these little like extracts from poetic or fairy tale works or something. So it's actually the kind of text he might have been reading in the book. I like to have an element of realism to the thing. But yeah, I can show you a couple of the kinds of things that I make then if you want to see a little bit of the range, because I'm definitely a bit of a, you know, I don't know what what you want to say, like not loyal to my craft, if you like, but like marbling. So with my can you see? With my younger son, we did a lot of marbling. So we, you know, it's kind of a very free-flowing way. So he had there was a, I think Italian or Swiss, a type founders who were doing a kind of publication of Heraclitus in 3 different translations with type that they founded themselves. and they wanted his work to be the end papers of their book. Like he was 4 years old at the time, but they wanted a child with like, you know, like free flowing. It's like something to do with the philosophies of like, you know, like a child playing with marbles or something. I don't know, it was connected. Yeah, so then there was this quilt. I dabbled in some chinoiserie earlier in the year. I made my own parchment last year. That was a big step for me, but this is a kind of a parchment culture. So it was like, you know, you have to take a chance. I just bought some shoe lasts, so I'm starting to go to the.
Yeah, making parchment is some process.
It was definitely a process, but like I said, it's kind of somewhat normal here. It's a parchment culture.
Yeah.
So I mean, I went to a local tannery and looked around where they had, you know, it's quite a modern tannery, quite a developed one, but they provide the parchment for the bindings here. And anyway, I don't know. Our neighbor gave us a sheep. Kind of, we were walking home one day, and there was a sheep outside our house, and it was a gift from our neighbor. So he hung around for a long time as a pet, and then one day the neighbor said, "Let's like slaughter him." And my husband saved me the skin in case I wanted to do something with it. So I was like, "Okay, now it's time to begin."
Well, yeah, good use of material.
Macchiato.
So talk us through the process. So you were given a skin, and seems like quite a task. What do you do? Don't you need some special instrument for cleaning it, for hanging it, for straightening it, for tanning it?
Yeah. So okay, first I soaked it for a week. So I looked up a lot of different methods, and I talked to like my teacher and some other guys here, and they were like, you know, just throw salt on it and keep it outside or something, and then you use lime and stuff. Or actually, no, one of my friends from the class, he does a lot of kind of Coptic work with the Orthodox Church. So he's kind of like, you know, connected with them in a lay capacity. He does like learning and work with the scholars there. And he was really like, no, you don't need to do anything, just salt it and scrape it. And I was like, that's not, I don't think that will work. So then I did my own research, and I soaked it for a week, and the hair was just falling off it really easily. So I was quite surprised. And one of my friends, he turned a chisel into a curve scraping tool. So I was trying that, and then I had another one which was actually supposed to be like a leather paring one, a Turkish one, which is also curved, but they were actually really sharp. I mean, I wouldn't say that my parchment came out amazing. It was a little bit brittle, but then I scored some lime. I actually live on the corner of the lime factory, I think. So someone gave me some lime, and I tried soaking that, and it, you know, stank out the whole house. But that was very effective. But I think it was actually like probably not the right concentration. It will definitely had a bit too much of an effect. And then, you know, so my classmates and my teacher came around, and we stretched it on a pallet. You know, we just like got some string and some like hooks, and I just screwed it up to a pallet and let it dry. I went away on holiday. I came back, scraped it down a bit, and that was it. It was good. It was okay.
Oh, that sounds
flexible. It was a little bit.
Sounds like a lot of fun. Well,
I
like trying new things, but I never. Well, I sort of considered trying to do something like that, but I never approached it before. Yeah.
Yeah, no, this is the kind of, you know, can-do attitude you have here, where you're just like, you don't need to buy it. Actually, parchment you can actually buy here relatively easily, but I mean, you're kind of like, you can do it, figure it out. And the process itself was really like, you know, maybe a week of labor, and most of it is kind of drying, curing time or something like that.
Nice.
Stretching. Yeah. So that's the one time only, though. I'm not going into the parchment business. My parchment guy has been AWOL. I don't know where he is. He lives in London half of the time. So but I got some like beautiful parchment from New York with like pergamena and white. You know them? They're like jewel
Yeah.
colors. So
Yeah, they
go
have
nicely
some
with
really
that.
nice stuff.
And when you say that in Eritrea parchment is still very much alive, I understand that manuscripts are still being written by hand on parchment. In which tradition? Is it just Coptic, Ethiopic, or is it Tigrinya? Eritrea has its own independent church, I understand.
Well, yeah. Okay, just 1 second. Let me just check if my teacher's come, because he can also help with insight, because I think he maybe have come to the door. Let me just see for 1 moment. Yeah, it's a very perceptive question. Actually, it is primarily the Orthodox Tawahdo Church that will be producing parchment manuscripts, and they still do it written in gears, like all handwritten. You know, they score the lines, they hand scribe it all, and then they hand bind it with a very specific red leather usually, and they blind tool it. So that process is a very long continuing tradition. And like yeah, even I think like friend of a friend of mine, he's studying kind of like a priestly course, I think. Anyway, and a part of their studies is the study of bookbinding. Like, as part of the wider theological course is to study binding along with their language studies of Ge'ez. And yeah, so it is a very I don't know what's the word, but it's very deeply rooted, and it's very like you know, like for a devotional tradition, it's kind of part and parcel along with the rest of the devotional learning. So with the Islamic tradition, this is an interesting one. Like, it's one that I've been really eager to learn more about, but it's kind of tricky at the moment. Like, it's something that I don't think has like, there's been some level of, maybe you could say, decline in that tradition within the last 50 years, perhaps. I don't know if you saw on my Instagram, they had unearthed like a whole collection of like Arabic Islamic manuscripts transcribing the Quran, most likely from a kind of a, you know, like a Quran learning school or circle attached to a certain sheikh. And those books were coming from like the last 200 years, like from within the Ottoman era up to almost the present day, up to like around the 1970s, 1980s. And then they were buried during, like, you know, I guess during the struggle, during a level of religious repression. And you know, I don't know how far those traditions have continued since that time of suppression. So those were on paper, though, even like the earlier ones, they were not on parchment.
I think we discussed this on our live stream quite recently, even that as Islamic tradition came to paper much earlier than European book tradition, there are more paper objects in the Islamic tradition, as far as I understand, and well, less animal materials you use for writing, not for cover, but well, at least for writing. Is it so, or?
This is what I understood as well. I did a lot of, like, well, I mean, some degree of research into Islamic bindings last year, because I wanted to produce an Islamic binding here. I mean, for a you know, to produce it for a competition, basically, but kind of with the idea of an Islamic binding produced from here, where maybe parchment culture would have continued longer. But yeah, maybe it was around, I don't know what your findings were, but like maybe even like the 11th century or something, that they would have begun turning to paper bindings.
Yeah.
So if I can show you the example of my parchment. My parchment is kind of like the onlay on this satchel. So they have, I don't know where I have. So locally, they have this kind of like, for the Coptic bindings, they still make these parchment satchels for their books as the kind of like a book bag. Not exactly the same as this, but I wanted to do something in that vein. So I used my own parchment on the cover, and this is some hand-drawn thread by my teacher's late mother. Anyway, some shark vertebrae from Sudan. Anyway, so then I saw the style of things that they had there, like, and I did a very simple one, but with parchment pages.
Nice.
Yeah, so it was kind of like so the idea of it, even the script is like that perhaps parchment bindings were still continuing to some extent in different places, but from what I observed, they were definitely using paper for their liturgical works, even here, even though there is a parchment culture and it is produced like a lot still. You know, even those books, I wasn't sure if the binding itself was done in Eritrea or if it was something more like kind of sent throughout the empire, like from the centers of learning, and that they were like exercise books, you know, like there's that.
So
And
if you
like a lot.
Sorry, and this style of wearable book, what would originally what book would that originally be? Is that for Qurans?
I don't think so. I think it's for the Orthodox devotional texts. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the Coptic bindings, Ethiopic bindings, you will find them in those, and in the market now. You can still go, like it's not like a kind of a very like rare thing or hidden thing. You can go to the market and find the parchment satchels, the Coptic bound books, but less of the parchment scribed books. Those ones will be kind of like, you know, limited to the scholars or the priests who will use them maybe. They're still accessible though. My friend will occasionally bring them into class. Look, this is what my teacher freshly scribed, and will be like a big, heavy, thick book, like a brick scribed throughout in ink, and it's beautiful. But so it's not like inaccessible, but it's not something that, you know, the general populace will have. But if you go to the market, you can find Coptic bound books and parchment satchels and the rest. Yeah.
would definitely need to go there. Just to see all of that. As you have now, as you have experience with the books with parchment pages, what's your experience with writing? Can you use ordinary pens or gel pens, or do you have to use ink? What's your experience with that?
Oh, I don't think. No. I don't know exactly the composition of the ink they use, but it doesn't seem to me that they're using a normal pen or like even like a modern calligraphy pen. Like it's very like a specific calligraphy, and if I'm not sure, is it a bamboo pen or what kind of style of pen they're using, but it's definitely like an ink and calligraphy style of gaze, like a stylized form that has to be perfect. Like they have a kind of a more common cursive form of the alphabet, and the alphabet in Tigrinya is kind of like, you know, more or less the same as the alphabet of Ge'ez, the liturgical, like more ancient language, but they would not see that as a, you cannot like interchange them. It has to be like a very perfect form of calligraphy. So whereas in those the Islamic books, they were not, they were like children basically, like probably like 8-year-olds writing. So it's very scribbly and very like, you know, there was biro even in some of those books, like the later ones. So that was a learning process, and this is not a learning book. The Gay is the Coptic books. They're a, you know, perfected final product.
Sorry, you've by now used one word several times, which many of our listeners will probably have never heard: Tigrinya, and maybe even Ge'ez. Perhaps we should explain what those are.
Ge'ez is the ancient language. I think, I don't know, from like maybe 2000 years old or something, like it could be, and even as a written language. So it died out it's more or less extinct as a spoken language, except within liturgical context, and as a written language. Most people, except those trained as priests, would not understand it or speak it, but it's still the language for Orthodox Church religious ceremonies or religious sermons. So as a script as well, I mean, it's maybe the longest continuously used script, I think, as a kind of still functional script. So it's it's a really fascinating language, and it's used, I think, in the Ethiopian church and the Eritrean church. So Tigrinya is a sister language, if you like, or a descendant language from Ge'ez. So it's the closest language still to Ge'ez. It's the main language of Eritrea, although they have many other languages. And the script is kind of like mostly the same letters that are still used between Ge'ez and Tigrinya, but the words would be different.
So
I don't know if
I'll
that's,
address my question to Pavel probably. So is it like the Church Slavonic and Russian and Ukrainian and Belarusian languages, so that most of the modern people cannot really understand liturgy in Church Slavonic, but even far apart in time?
Oh, it's a bit further related. It's about as related as modern Hebrew and biblical Hebrew.
Okay.
And I understand they do come from the same group of languages, like Arabic, Hebrew, Ge'ez, Tigrinya. They are all Semitic languages, but very distantly related, about as distantly as say Russian and English. Yeah.
I'm not sure if it is as distantly as Russian and English, but yeah, it's definitely like a different branch within the Semitic language group. But like I know enough Arabic to be able to see like, you know, the level of connection. I feel like it seems to me closer than like say Indic languages and English, or Russian and English.
And Arabic used in Eritrean Islam, is it the same classic Arabic, or other local varieties as there are in Northern Africa? Because from what I understand, say Moroccan and Algerian Arabic are pretty different.
You know, it's not like, unless you are very educated and using it like formally, that they would be using classical Arabic. It's not something that people are learning outside of Islam. It is a native language of the country, and you have like down south, it will be even one of the primary languages that people use. So it might be closer to the Yemeni Arabic, even like they will have a lot of influence from Yemen, and Saudi. Like a lot of travelers go to the Gulf, or migrants, and return from Saudi, from the Gulf countries. And then on the border with Sudan as well, it's basically like, you know, the Sudanese language and culture and dialects. So you see both of those influences. And then of course they also had this connection with the Ottoman Empire, so then they had influences from that as well. And so you could see that even in the buildings of the south, or you know, around the language and the inscriptions on buildings and things, and like it was used as an administrative language. So you have multiple kind of influences on the Arabic, and depending on the function, depending on the location that you're in. But they do also learn it as a religious language. So the Quranic Arabic, the classical Arabic is still something that people will have a lot of familiarity with and be using. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely one of the languages that is not just for Muslims. Like depending on where you are, in Asmara, it might be more the Muslims who are using Arabic because they have the connection with their religious learning, and you know, maybe like a heritage thing. But if you're near the Sudan border, or if you're near the coast, it will be everybody who can speak Arabic.
Eritrea has long been this melting pot of cultures for thousands of years, and certainly for the last 500 years. Do you see all those influences in local bookbinding tradition, or is it mostly Coptic binding, Coptic end bands, etc., or other influences?
Like I was saying, in our course, it's not the Coptic tradition. Like we've asked for it, and we've had kind of demonstrations from students who have that knowledge from their own kind of background experiences, but the primary teaching is the Italian tradition, and very classically the Italian tradition. So the master who came, he was an Italian. He was part of the Pavonian group, but he was like a master of bookbinding from there. The materials they brought, so they brought a lot of materials by the container load for their courses, and all of the machinery. So they have like kind of, I mean, like mid to maybe like up to late 20th century machinery, like mid to late. So from like, all of the sewing frames, all of the, all the whatever presses and everything. They have all of the tools that you would use in a European or Italian bindery, and they brought them over, especially at a time where it was easier to bring things. I think the last decade or so, they haven't brought more material. So what we have is kind of like the main thing that is being consumed now and not replenished. But those were like Italian block printed papers, like a lot of beautiful things that were in the Italian tradition, and all of the foiling, stamping machines, the type were coming from there. And that institution or that course trained a lot of the binders who you will find around the city in different printing presses, in the archiving institutions. They have a lot of influence in bookbinding culture in Eritrea, even institutions around the country, like churches, like colleges, who have collections that they need to have bound or restored or whatever. They will come to these binders, and they will bind it in that tradition, not in the Coptic tradition, unless it is a very specific Coptic book. But they're not all going to be Coptic bindings. And even when they are Coptic bindings, sometimes they're not bound again exactly in the Coptic tradition. They'll be like, no, the Italian way is stronger. Let's fix it up like this. There is a knowledge of both, like especially with my teacher. He's the main binder at the National Archive Center, so they get a lot of books from around the country, and they do train people around the country on like how to maintain their books as well. So he has to have knowledge of the different traditions, and even the Islamic traditions to some extent. He has spoken of very specific kinds of books that you find around the country that I haven't observed myself, like wearable books and different kinds of things. I've seen things like, like the Yemenite tradition of kind of like amulets. Do you know what I mean? Like jewelry that has like a book inside.
Oh, yeah, I guess I know what you mean. Yeah, I think I know.
Ornate. So most people see they think of it as like a Rashida tradition, but I mean, I guess it's coming out of a Yemenite tradition. So like those kind of very ornate silver filigree wearable, like those are the satchels that you have a book inside. So those you can still find as well. Like there are a number of traditions that still exist, and I don't know to what extent they overlap. Maybe the Coptic and the Italian overlap more, and I don't know to what extent people are still producing the Islamic, and I don't know to what extent there will be any production of the Yemenite ones. Like maybe they're more decorative than functional now. You find them in the jewelry shops. So
it would be really great to find someone who still works in Yemenite tradition, either in Eritrea, in Ethiopia, or in Yemen, indeed. But it's not easy. I've been.
Sure.
Do you know?
I've met people who know about that. Yeah, for sure. Like, if you need a link with that, I have a good friend who's a Yemeni archaeologist, and she could probably get hold of someone who knows about this.
Well, we can talk to her as well. That would be great. If she may be interested in that.
I mean, this kind of thing, I think I got this in Yemen, but they still make these they still use these in Eritrea. These are the tablets. Have you seen these?
Yeah.
No, like, only in museums.
Okay, yeah. I mean, but they still use these kind of tablets in Sudan, in Eritrea, for children to learn. They're basically like slates, right? They get written with ink and washed and rewritten for learning their scripture, like Quranic scripture. So they're copied and recopied, and so this one is like, you can see like the washes of ink all over it, but it's still quite common.
It's very decorative. It's really surprising to see it in a home context. Yeah. It's a really beautiful object, and a very bookish one.
Yeah, but I think if you were going to the madrasa or something, you would find them just like piled up for kids to be writing and learning on still. They're definitely keep to the older traditions here. They've modernized completely, or like, it's still a present continuing tradition, even in Sudan.
You've mentioned your teacher who's long been repairing books and conserving books and rebinding books, but you've also started doing that yourself. I've seen a couple of projects. Could you talk about that a bit?
At the school, they have a very like important library collection, which one of the fathers, he was a big collector of like, you know, regional scholarship on like history and languages, and he collected a lot of books from like Italian colonial archives to like, you know, like some of the very early publications in the country, and like a lot of different books. And he has a big collection that is still being classified, is still being processed. So he passed away like maybe 7-8 years ago, and so there's stacks and stacks of books that he has that haven't been processed for this library that they have, and a lot of them are in need of repair. Or anyway, so it's an exercise for the students. Basically, these are the books that are used for learning the methods of binding and restoration. So it's a big part of the course. So so you know, we take them apart, we do any repairs. I'm sometimes concerned that we're doing more damage than repairing, but anyway, this is one of the questions that are there, of like, what are the best materials and do we have them, and like how to manage that sensitively. So not all of the books are like of great general value, of obviously, like some of them might just be whatever's very commonly available pulp fiction, and others might be like artifacts basically. So it's for me, I'm always curious to see the structures and the binding as well, and very, very slow, but you know, it's probably better to be slow than not. But yeah, I mean, one of the things here, you don't find like people with anything, with clothing, with other objects, you know, with furniture, they will always be like repairing and restoring. Like this is a very, very important thing to do in a place where you don't necessarily have access for replacements. Is not like a, you know, like a consumerist culture, if you like. So they have like a workshop in town called Medeber, which is basically like a scrapyard where everyone just goes, and there's just like welding and building, and they will just be able to fix or repair anything. So with books, a lot of people will come with their like religious books. So those are the ones that are most valued, the ones that they you know, maybe have passed down from like their fathers or grandfathers, and they want to honor it and they want to keep it and preserve it, and they don't know if they could necessarily replace it. So I have actually one example here of my this is the lady who helps me in the house. So her father passed away, and she had his Bible, and it had like maybe 10-20 pages missing at the beginning. This is in Tigrinya, and like at the end, and it was very like messed up. But it was an early edition of the book, so I had to like look for the specific edition and get it copied on these papers. And yeah, so it's something that is like, and then rebound in local leathers. So yeah, so with Qur'an and Bibles, I've ended up doing quite a few, because these are like the books that people are personally attached to. But also newspaper archives is quite a big thing. So there are a lot of people who have personal collections. Like you find in Asmara, at least, there are hidden museums everywhere in people's houses or in people's like a storeroom. It's like you'll suddenly walk in and it's like a museum of like crazy artifacts of scrolls and like all of these like old things from, I don't know, like I'm not sure, they don't always know the history or the provenance of everything that they have, but they're just like fascinating collections, and like, you know, photos and film and things from times gone by that no one has maybe even seen before, and it's not brought out, and they're just keeping them. So like, yeah, it's really incredible. So one of our friends, he has a glass factory locally, and he has like a huge, basically a museum of like 20th century artifacts, from like full cars from the 1930s that he's restored, or like gramophones and projectors and calculators from like the early 20th century, and everything under the sun, including books. And so he has a big newspaper archive that he will take to the bindery to have bound to as part of his collection. And he's not the only one who's like that. They have like very significant collections that they want to preserve and keep as a personal museum. So yeah, it's really interesting to work with these people, like these individuals in the city who have this I don't know, just kind of this interest in their own history and collecting it, and they want to preserve it in the best way without, you know, without any other interest necessarily.
Yeah, you mentioned that sometimes people keeping these objects of past, these books, don't even really know their story and their history, and that's something you discussed quite recently with Tarlan Handayani, a bookbinder from Indonesia that have been on our live stream, and she told us that quite often there are some religious Islamic texts held in some families, and they sort of cherish them as an object, but they don't really know what's happened, how they appeared to be this religious texts in their families, and oftentimes because they are not used, they're starting to fall apart. So that's also an issue, and she's been working on some of these texts to repair them, to restore them. So, but that's definitely an issue there for many countries and many cultures in Europe as well. I know in Russia people quite often don't know their family's history and the provenance of some, I don't know, objects that came from their grandfathers or grandmothers, like icons or Bibles or something like that. So yeah, unfortunately, that's something that happens all over the world.
Oh yeah, of course, and especially when there have been periods of like religious suppression, as I said, like throughout history, then there can be like a disconnect that happens. That maybe there was a long flowing tradition through generations, and then there's kind of like something that breaks with that. And
Yeah.
how you can recover that. Maybe you can find people of those generations still who can help you to reconnect, but you have to have the determination to try and do that. So possibly if you find some historians who are specialized in it, like even in the islands, like the Dahlak Islands, there is a kind of an archipelago off the coast. So that was kind of had a slightly different culture, and like was, you know, had a historical geographical position as like a trading center. So they had a lot of different influences, and you can find things like very, very old, like inscribed stone tablets and things have like these beautiful scripts from a different era, even like, you know, ancient South Arabian scripts and scriptures like can be found, like the Sabian. They're present. There's a very ancient history, but like for me, you know, I was curious because like in the Islamic tradition, there was the very early migrants out of the Prophet Muhammad's own community in the very, very early years of revelation, where they escaped persecution, like in the first 3 years. So before they established a state or anything else, they came to Eritrea. I mean, they came to the coast of Abyssinia, which is in Eritrea. So they have like the mosque, they have kind of like a recognition of the community being there. So it was like, there is this community that evolved to some extent, not exactly separately or cut off, but yeah, to some extent they had a different maybe trajectory, and maybe their stories, how were they documented, how was their life, and you know, how did they maintain or develop their culture and tradition, their religious tradition with it as a minority at that time, like from that very early era, is like would be a fascinating source of like what was their understanding of that period, because that was such an early period of the faith itself. But it's very hard to find like the information there. I think the Arab world or the Islamic scholars were not necessarily following these guys. They talked about them once they came back again to Medina. They're like, okay, these guys came back and they told us a few things about Abyssinia, but they didn't have people following what happened to the guys who stayed in Abyssinia, you know.
I also wanted to ask you about the much more recent history of Eritrea and how it's reflected by your work. You bound a copy of a rather famous Eritrean book, 2 Weeks in the Trenches, and you used a special leather. Could you talk about that book and the leather you used and the whole project?
So actually, that's probably one of the things that got me, like most directly got me into bookbinding, was the leather, because we passed by and we found this shop, and now I'm very like, I basically live in that shop these days. But they had a tannery that closed down in the 70s. It's still there, kind of, you know, decaying somewhere in the outskirts of Asmara, but the leathers that they produced were so beautiful. So it was an Italian Eritrean who established that store. I have some of their leathers here, and like, because of the nature of these ones, I think they're mostly like skins, so they're very fine and very supple. Like, they're so thin that they don't need, like, they basically don't need paring, a lot of them. They're, and like, they have like such kind of unusual markings and characteristics, so like so they kind of work well for, I suppose, specific kinds of stories, like fantasy or something, maybe, that look like they've been mauled by monsters. But or like, you know, like my friend, who he's, you know, he would love to revive the leather workings that they have, but yeah, it's like, he talked to me about the leather, about his understanding of them, like when they were produced and how, and like different characteristics. So like, some of them, the markings would have come from like diseases of the animal that could, or like some of them would have been just like, you know, like either like it could come from storage or damage after, like during the storage of the leather over these last 50 years, but they could also be from the animals themselves, like if they had any kind of like yeah, diseases or other kinds of like problems. So like, you know, you could actually kind of mark them in a geological way of like, this is the period where they had this kind of disease in the country. So I really like the idea of like the material as a kind of like temporal geographical marker, you know. So that's why I wanted to use it for this book in particular, because it's very much about the landscape and the, you know, the life of these soldiers. It has like a lot of different short stories actually in this book, but the main one is this experience of being in the trenches in a very specific location, and like the mountains and landscapes. So I was like, these animals could have actually been there in front of them, like in this space. Like if you touch this, it could be touching something of that time, you know, like something of the life or something of the world. So it's just like a physical connection, and also the markings also gives this kind of sense of a scarring and a, like, you know, a life lived. So yeah, I mean, I'm gonna present this to someone, I think. But the problem with this one, and I need to make another one with some good book board, is that I don't know if I have an example to show you, but lately the book board that they've been using is actually like shoe insole board, which is very flexible and malleable, unfortunately, and it causes kind of warping. So
Yeah.
like, it's very difficult to counteract, but the nice strong book board is now being hoarded for the very special book. But like some of the leathers as well, like this is a conservation question, if you like. It's like some of them, like this, I took it because it's so fragile. It's basically like paper now. Look,
Okay.
it's like
Yeah.
like cardboard, like so dried out and so thin, but it's pretty cool. Like you would use this for like interesting onlays, like you can cut it really precisely and easily. But so like, I like these ones. I'm like, Desi, please, like, bring me the great Ds. I want to see like the really like crazy ones that are just like, you know, full of like, I don't know what happened in their lives, but these animals have been through something. And the really dried out ones, like, they have special properties and they're not going to be used by anyone else. Like nowadays, these leathers, he will sell them still to shoemakers locally, mostly, and maybe some other craftsmen. But you know, for me, they're great for bookbinding, I think. And I find that these kind of leather crafts, they actually kind of feed each other in a way. I know in my home city or in Stockport, they have this, I mentioned to you, like this bookbinding supply company that has been quite long established and supplies like the royal libraries and such. But their industry came out of a byproduct of like the hat and glove industry in the city. So it's like, they're producing these leathers, or they're utilizing them, and they're very fine and they're very thin. And so then this is also like a natural sister industry for that product. So even for me at first, I was playing around with the leather. What can I make? I was making like baby shoes. I was making this and that. You know, I thought about making jackets or something. And then I was reading a book of my husband's, this Witcher book, and the cover fell off, and I was like, I'll make you a new cover. And obviously, like, if I make something, then I'll do a deep dive into how to do that thing. So then this is the first one I made. You see, this is like, I'll make you a cover
Nice.
to
Yeah.
replace the paper
That's how it
that
happens.
I
Yeah.
broke. And so, but you can see the characteristic of this leather is so beautiful, right? Like this kind of like, can you see in the, I don't know.
You can see some detail here, but it's not the best quality of the video, unfortunately.
I mean, it's just kind of all over marked and like got these
Yeah.
like kind of staining. Like I don't have to do anything to get this kind of. I
Yeah.
don't know, the
Yeah.
paper's
Yeah.
kind of-
Yeah. We can
Yeah,
see it.
yeah.
Just not in high detail, but we can definitely understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. So they're beautiful. So I really love working with that, and even like you can stamp it and tool it, and it's really beautiful. So I haven't really convinced everyone else that this is the amazing bookbinding leather that I find it to be. A lot of them still use like even synthetic because that's useful for that, just like foil stamping, a lot of things.
Okay.
Like they're kind of a bit more practical about it. But like say this is a book of my teacher's, which he uses kind of like like some animal hides, I suppose, that are quite characteristic as well. Anyway, yeah, so the leather was really what brought me to it.
It's great to have access to such an archive of old leathers. It's just something. It's a project on its own.
Maybe it's just for my enthusiasm, whatever. But now it's like if I want some leather, then I'll just go to the shop. I'll go to the back room, and there'll be like thousands of rolls of different leathers of different weights and colors and things, and I will just like come back with arms of it, and then he will be like, okay, either it'll get gifted or it'll be on my long-standing tab. So I get encouraged to buy unhealthy amounts of leather, but I'll use it one day. But I mean, I'm the one that I feel like I appreciate it on a level that maybe others are like just using it to line the insoles of the shoes. So it's like I'm celebrating it.
Yeah, exactly. Do you have to prepare the old leathers in some way for your bindings, or you just use them as you would use any other leather?
Mostly I try to choose the ones that are not too dried out, that are still supple and very fine. So, and without too much things, there's a lot of it there, but a lot of them will have things like some kind of level of, like holes and things that you have to go through the ones that will be suitable, or else maybe if I feel like there's some special quality about it, I really will use it, then I will still try to condition it or something. I don't know, sometimes I don't have like specific like good leather conditioners. It's one of the questions that we have, like of how we're going to preserve his materials in a way that's going to be like usable or to be able to restore them. So like what are good leather conditioners? So we've been talking to the tannery guy as well, and like we haven't found the answer of what is the most suitable local product to condition leathers. I don't know if you have any advice. I sometimes use like a vegetable oil, like olive oil, and swipe it at the end, which might not be the best, but
yeah, but
it's okay.
I don't have any advice, unfortunately, because I always used new leathers, and I didn't have any experience with working with old leathers. So unfortunately, I'm not an expert in this area. Maybe some of our viewers will have some comments or recommendations, and it will be interesting to hear and see their comments. And that's, by the way, a good moment to remind them that we're glad to see any comments from them, any questions, and if they have something to ask of Zeenat, we will pass the questions, and we'll probably either post the answers below the video or answer them separately in one of the next live streams. But yeah, please comment. Please tell us from where you are watching, and please tell us about working with old leathers. What's your experience, dear viewers?
I mean, with the tanneries here, again, like tannery production, it seems to me has declined even in the time that I've been here. Like in the first couple of years when they had the slaughtering time for like big festivals, then there would be a centralized gathering of all of the animal skins, and it would be taken like by a central, like maybe a government organized thing to be processed into leather. But that is no longer happening, I think, since the pandemic maybe. So even like a number of local tanneries have closed down, and most of those tanneries, I think, is kind of like I think the biggest issue is the supplies of specific materials, because they're not like, you know, like ancient vegetable tanned ones. They're more like chrome tanned, and you know, need inputs from the outside. So I think that was one of the biggest factor in the closing of production, or the limiting of production. It still is going on. Like I said, my parchment guy has been AWOL. He said he was pickling 10 skins to turn into parchment for me, but that was a while back. So, you know, you can still get someone, and it's still kind of like, you know, your connections to different artisans is very personal. So the parchment guy is the uncle of my leather guy, and like it's like just, you know, take him around. Have you seen him around? Kind of thing.
And I saw also you use papyrus, or am I wrong?
Yeah, I used it, but again, it was just kind of like in this experimental research of how Islamic bindings were produced. So I had some papyrus. I think I bought it during my honeymoon like 12 years ago or something, and I never used it. So I was like, okay, time to bring out that roll of papyrus. You know, never know when it'll come in handy. So then I just like laminated it with some hide glue until I built up the layers to be the book board for this this one. Yeah, so the book one, or no one can see it, it's not like visible or anything. I just, for the authenticity, that I learned something, you know. And I tried to do a little Islamic headband as well with silk. So yeah, it's not something that I generally use. It was just kind of like, okay, they were not necessarily using cardboard, but they were not necessarily using wood. There was this laminated papyrus. Let's see what the properties of that are like. And it was quite nice to use, actually, because it's very crisp and it has these like interwoven sections. So when it was laminated together, it was actually very, very sturdy and stable. So it's not like with the parchment, this was just kind of a one-off experiment. Like I like to use projects as kind of a jumping off point to explore maybe like a specific binding culture or history. So like I have a project that I'm trying to start now, which is my mother's cookery book that she got when she was married, and my brother's just got married. So I want to rebind it to present to him as a wedding gift. And so I'm trying to explore kind of Indic bookbinding cultures, but it's very difficult to find information on that, to be honest. Like I know there was this like turmeric dyed, of course, because Bengalis do everything with turmeric, but it has like kind of, I don't know, insect repelling properties or something, but like palm leaves, I think, and like, so they have this very ancient, like super ancient form of, I don't know if you would even call it a codex, because they're kind of like just on a looped together on a chain or something, or on a,
still a book.
maybe you know more.
Yeah.
Okay.
Probably
Still
not a
book.
codex,
So,
but still a book. Yeah.
like, it would be nice to bind this and then have kind of like a palm leaf like index card form of recipes, like to explore that. So it'd just be like the note form of a few different key recipes on a like a hoop or a bangle. So that's the concept, but basically it's like an excuse to explore a very niche a very niche bookbinding, historical bookbinding culture. So it's the same thing I do with my textiles, to be honest. It's like I'm not so interested in making everyday clothes, but like, you know, maybe I'll like, I don't know if I can show you. I'm like working on this like a Tudor doublet at the moment. I don't know. Like a jerkin or something, and then like some like 1950s dress over here. So it's like more of a research exercise than anything, all of these, than actual practicalities, I suppose. I try to combine both. Yeah, so I don't know how that will go. I haven't found exactly guidance on Indian bookbinding, but maybe I can find something on that. And it's a good way to learn languages as well. Like with the Bible, I tried to just try and turn the camera. So I mean, I haven't started making book furniture, like these kind of things, but you see like the opening page, I tried to scribe in not very calligraphic Tigrinya, just as a kind of personal element. And then I took out the first paragraph of this Bible to have the first page like that. Like just things of kind of learning the language, learning the history through this medium.
Beautiful.
So I'll try and practice my Bengali writing as well with this thing.
So what the future holds for you for your bookbinding? What's besides the cookbook and maybe some other projects you mentioned? What are your plans? Where do you want to branch to?
It's a good question because like I haven't actually, to be honest, done a lot of bookbinding except the odd custom order since I graduated in July from that course. But one of the things I really wanted to try and do was to find ways to promote or enhance bookbinding culture in Eritrea, like maybe to hold an exhibition with other binders or even like a competition, or to help to support the other student graduates from the program, because the students that are here, they come from a number of different backgrounds. So one of the primary groups that have been supported since the origins of the mission, I think, are like deaf students. So they have a program coming up, I think, at the National Archives to learn bookbinding for them as a kind of vocational trade. So like maybe to discuss with them about the materials and the things that they may need for their learning, because it's not always very easy to acquire the necessary materials, especially for very specific tasks. Then I have like other friends or other people who've graduated the program, but they're kind of like trying to find ways to apply their craft. So some of them go to printing houses where it's kind of more like seen as a, like it's not necessarily treated in the way of like the skilled labor that they've done this like very extensive learning. It's more like treated as a, factory process. But it's okay. Like some of them are fine with that. Like they've come from backgrounds where they're just looking for a vocational trade, whereas others are like, there was a group who, like I said, came from the National Archives. So they're learning just to have a kind of holistic understanding for their archival work. Like, for example, one of them is on the digitization program. So for the digitization, they have been disassembling books, putting them on a flatbed scanner, scanning them in, and then reassembling them, rather than having this like kind of photographing from above technique. So for him to have some understanding of the binding process in order for him to sensitively handle the books that he's scanning, for example. Then there are others who are like coming from a, like a church background, like a lot of Catholics or even Orthodox who are going to apply their work in a form of service to their communities. So their community, or like, their libraries in their religious centers. So they're going to maintain them, they're going to restore them, maybe produce new things. So again, like maybe to if there was some way that I could support them, or things that they might need to develop their small binderies, then like that would be a great thing. Or otherwise to help to have like more advanced learning, especially if they're dealing with kind of sensitive or unique documents that they might find in their like other areas outside of Asmara, like then maybe that we could have further training. Like I really wanted to bring in a specialized kind of conservation or book conservationist from Italy who is specialized in working in these kind of contexts where they might not have like a lot of resources available, or they might have very specific and sensitive documents, and to facilitate their learning using local materials. So if there was a way to do projects like that are going to advance kind of bookbinding in general, then that would be amazing. But it's a little bit easier said than done. Like with the best will in the world, things take a very long time, if at all. So I hope that this is kind of a part of that effort of promoting and celebrating Eritrean bookbinding that few people, even here, kind of like understand or know about and value in the way that it should be valued. So you know, even to do something that like that to showcase the craft and the craftsmanship and the heritage that they have themselves, it is a huge thing, because a lot of people come to the binders, and I'm sure there's a common issue around the world with having no idea of the labor and the skill involved, and like, you know, and even the cost of the materials as a basic thing, but just generally like to treat it as a skilled trade and a very specific art form that they have learned here in a way that few people have access to around the world. So there's that. For my own personal projects, it's kind of, I would love to learn more, you know, like design binding and gold tooling and all of these like very beautiful, fine binding level techniques that I don't think I have learned yet. So it's kind of, occasionally I'll bring a book of gold leaf along and be like, I'm gonna try. I have all of these stamps and all of these tools, and I'm a big kind of like sucker for collecting, you know, old tools and things I don't know to use yet without proper training and figuring out. But I mean, we'll see how it goes with that. If I can, here it's not so easy to bring in someone to train you, and like I have a lot of scope still for learning here, and like especially like Ethiopic traditions I haven't learned or practiced that more, so I would love to do that. And I have a big pile of books that are there to be bound if I come to them, but I have some that I could make certain sets of books that are very popular sets and sell them, but I'm less motivated to do that unless it's a, you know, productive learning, like creative learning process. So I need to find the thing I want to learn and use it on a set that I then sell. So I recently bought a laser cutter, so I was thinking of working on laser cut on lathe and reliefs and things. So that would be the experimental side. So it's more about learning and experimentation for me than trying to set up a business. Like I have a Etsy shop where occasionally people see what I've made and request a custom order, but because the logistics are so hard to send things from here anyway, I don't really focus on selling. It's not something that is my, you know, primary interest, although it's obviously nice when someone reaches out to you, but it's kind of a lot of effort. I have to find someone who's traveling to another country and send it from there, and like it's like I don't know, just once or twice a year I'll sell something locally. Is not something that's going to make you me. Generally it's like you make something as a gift, or you make something, you know, yeah, really it's just gifting or service. You know, if it's like a Bible or something, then it's kind of just like a service, like a contribution to the community. And this is something I think a culture of that probably that I learned from the school, from the other students, where they also like, they don't pay, I didn't have to pay for my course, for my learning, and the other students, like it was made available because their primary interest was giving you know, like vulnerable people, or like people who you know, are disadvantaged even within this context, a chance to have a trade. And they do a number of other things like traditional weaving and hairdressing and sewing and computer skills and various other courses for like vulnerable people and the marginalized and deaf people. So you know, I had the benefit of that. So contributing in whatever way locally is something that they have kind of taught. It's not about a business. But of course I try to encourage at least the other students, like maybe it's my Western mindset or something, but like it's like, yeah, but it's not a business, you know, like you should get paid.
Yeah.
Like I have one amazing linoprint artist friend of mine who also did the course with me, and he recently, for an exhibition of his new work, he like letterpress printed and bound like 100 books within like a week or 2 weeks. Like the letterpress, the printing presses here, a lot of them still use like Heidelberg print, like letterpress machines, right? It's like, and they need electricity, which might come on like it's kind of been through different times of the day. So it's printing through the night, and he made all these books by hand with his lino prints in it as like end papers or whatever. And then he just gave them for free to everybody. Like, I was like, you could have sold these. People are coming to your exhibition to see your work. They would have bought it at the exhibition. There's like a point of pride to him that he doesn't need to sell it. Like, I don't know. Like,
well,
no,
if it works, it works.
So he's just like constantly gifting beautiful books to like everybody. And I can't always compute that mindset of like really almost intentionally not making money from your craft. But I can respect and learn from it at the same time. It can help you be more creative, maybe.
And I've seen his work. You link to his Instagram account on your page, and he is an amazing artist. And that kind of craft should certainly be reimbursed, shall we say?
Well, he sells his lino prints and his painted work, so maybe he wants to be seen foremost as that form of artist, that his focus, and the bookbinding is kind of just a supplementary aspect. So I mean, the course that it took a brief break during the early lockdown period, right, during the pandemic, and then they restarted before a lot of things opened up in Asmara. And so the kind of it was like the only meeting point for a lot of people at that time. They didn't have anything else they could go to, but we were going to this bookbinding class in the evening, so it was like a really amazing point of connection. And at that time, a number of people who maybe hadn't considered doing binding before because they had other kinds of work and they had other interests, including quite a big group of artists who wouldn't usually like invest that much time into this craft, came because this is like they had time on their hands. So then I think from that, the course changed a little bit from being very focused on traditional library bindings, restoration work, to having this like kind of whole area of like very creative experimental artists who are in the classroom, who are like taking the ideas and running with them in a creative direction. So he was among that group, but there were like a few others. So batik artists, there's a number of people who are prominent local artists, and I don't know necessarily if they're still book binding then, but I feel like even I could class myself in within that group that we really valued and wanted to explore the creative aspect, and even looking at bookbinding around the world as well, and like exploring new ideas. So starting to share like videos or pictures. Those guys were kind of probably more among the privileged of Eritrea. They had or Asmara, they have access to like the international community as well to share things with and to showcase their work, but they also have more access to social media, so they're like looking at the global bookbinding traditions as well, and drawing new ideas and sharing their ideas. So that I feel was kind of a different energy that came during that time, and I wonder how that will continue now that like as every new group comes, there's kind of a different makeup of the group. But yeah, like I'm interested to see where the creative bookbinding goes from here. Like there's the letterpress culture as well. Like it's something that I'm really interested in. That's also probably part of what brought me into it, is that I went to the cathedral where they have a big like the Tipographia Franciscana, the Franciscan press,
yeah.
and they've been there since like for a long time, maybe since the 30s or something, and they have a publishing house, a press within the cathedral complex. So their machinery ranges from like the early to the late 20th century. So they have kind of like they have your perfect binding, like glue machines, of your Heidelberg presses, using some kind of like computerized etching to make their plates, and so then they're using those on the Heidelberg. So they're kind of combining technologies. I think the director of that press, he was trained in the UK, so he brought a lot of newer technology ideas, and so they're combining a lot of technologies in that space, and it was so fascinating. And then he showed me a book that they use for training, which came from the Pavoni Institute, and I was like, oh, what is this place? So it was like a Italian book that had been translated into Tigrinya, so that sparked my curiosity, and I wanted to find the space, and then I discovered it's actually literally 2 minutes from my house, so it's great. And so the one who wrote that book, he was the master Marco Manca. He still lives in Italy now. He left maybe a decade ago. Yeah, he wrote the course for like a 2-year or 3-year course, and had it all translated into Tigrinya so that he could teach the students. And he also made a dictionary of bookbinding, an Italian Tigrinya dictionary of bookbinding, which I have a copy. Let me see. This one.
Nice.
I don't know if
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, Pavoni Social Center at the bottom, and it's got like pictures of all the different tools. And it's just a dictionary, literally, of like terminology. So a lot of the terminology we'll still use in the class is Italian terminology, not Tigrinya terminology. So I don't even know how specific it is to the like. So this is the stamping press.
Stamping.
I don't know if you can identify. Someone was asking which one it was. I didn't know exactly, but this is the one they use for foil stamping, and they have a lot of type. So you can see like this is maxi bind. Like it's not like all super traditional. They have so yeah, I was using this a little bit because, again, like I'm not Italian or Tigrinya speaker, but the classes were all in Tigrinya with Italian terminology for the bookbinding. I mean, fortunately, my teachers know English, so there was a lot of, helping me along. But yeah, anyway, to learn as I went for the notes that were on the blackboard in Tigrinya. But yeah, so these kind of materials are what led me to the center, and they're really like, again, like so unique. Like, where are you going to find, the explanation of what Filmoplast P90 is in Tigrinya? And this is like one of the chief things I get asked to bring with me if I come back from abroad. It's like, you're not going to get that in any other kind of like books. Really nice. So he really went into a lot of like granular detail about everything that he thought that they would need. So he really like made a foundation for bookbinding, like I said, beyond the center, and like the language and the and the like the concepts of it. But it wasn't like I said, it's within the Italian tradition. I don't know if he is versed in all the different traditions. It may well be, but what he was conveying, what he was focused on teaching was this specific tradition. So all of the course will take you through. I mean, even like for our like tests and things, we'll have like, the trays, and like we'll have like the blank table. It's like your periodic table, like fill in where all of the letters should go for the Fantasia type drawer, and for this type, like 4 different types, Russo or something. So 4 different types of type drawers, which were the type cabinets that he brought to Asma. Those are the ones that are in the bindery. So it's like, we'll all be sorting out the type to be put in these different drawers. So we need to know them inside out. But you only need to know the ones that are there. You're not going to need to know any of the other ones that are in the outside world. These are the ones that are in Asmara. Learn these inside out, these 4 specific kinds of type drawer layout until you have them memorized and could like do it blindfolded. And that's it.
Nice. Nice.
So it's a really beautiful course book. I should have brought a copy of it back with me, but that's still being used and followed very religiously to the day. So all of the formula and everything. My teacher, I don't know if he will turn up, but he was at the school since he was little, basically, because like they served a lot of community children, supported them or like fostered them even. So like a number of the teachers and a number of the like supporting teachers were either brothers of the community who were kind of learning from the different areas of the center, or people who've been brought up within the center's community. So he was among those. So he was kind of like just always at the feet of the teacher, like running around as a little kid, wondering what this machine was or that machine was. So he absorbed things on a different level. He's the same age as me, but his kind of breadth of knowledge and his memory for all these details is like incredible. And it's one of the things that kind of obviously I value hugely, like, you have these people who can continue traditions of people who have left and are not going to come back. But then a lot of people do leave, and even my teacher originally, who was one of the priests of the center, so he was more traditional. He was conveying things in a very methodical way of like what we learned, what we need to pass on in a kind of very Pavoni legacy kind of way, as opposed to my teacher, who's got a more broader experience, I suppose. He went to Italy to do some further training, and who knows when or if he's coming back. And his going is like a huge loss, right? Every single person who goes. So then if Michele left now, I cannot picture, I don't know of anyone who could replace that level of knowledge that he has. You know, there's not anyone comparable as far as I know. So it's very fragile, these traditions, like as long standing and continuous as they have been somehow. They're also like so centered in like individuals, you know.
Have you yourself thought about teaching and fostering local culture among people who are less likely to leave?
Well, I mean, I can't say that you can say that there's anyone who's more or less likely to leave, but I have thought, especially if I'm able to learn like a specific form of binding or like a specific technique, I can, you know, it's always open for me to go and teach, or for anybody, like, you know, if we have a specialized skill or specialized tool or anything, to come in and share it. Like, it's a very open space. I still go and visit often. They have coffee ceremonies where you just gather and like, you know, it's a very, you become part of a family there. So yeah, of course. And it is one of the things, like, obviously, because I have that privilege of access to the internet, and a very like, you know, like much more than most people, and access to traveling, going back and forth. It means that I could do courses outside, or I could do courses online and then share that with people. My Tigrinya language skills are not like at that level, but it's okay. Most people would be able to understand anyway in English, or there would be people who could translate. But I don't want to, at the same time, try to distract from the tradition that they've been learning. Like, they have a specific course laid out, and it's something that is, you know, has a lot of value in itself. So it's kind of like what people feel they need on a functional level as well. So it's more of a what support you actually need, rather than always bringing good new ideas because I'm on Instagram and following bookbinders around. Like, with my artist friends, they love that. We come and be like, look, you can etch things with salt water and electricity. Let's do it, but be careful of chlorine gas. And then Binyam will go off and be like, yes, I tried it, it works. And he's just like etching metal plates, like in his studio. But not everyone needs to be doing that nonsense.
Okay, so we talked for 90 minutes, and I guess we'll be finishing this talk. And well, it was quite amazing, and it was really inspiring to hear your story, and well, to see some of your works and to hear your ideas. So thank you for joining us today. And yeah, sorry, yeah.
I'm sorry, no, I was just going to mention one small added thing of kind of the things we've been trying to develop for the school. Was like the tools. One of the big obstructions for people who graduate is the tools and the space to be able to do their work like individually. So like, we've been going to local carpenters, showing them how to make like even like small presses, like this kind of thing on a stand, so they can do, you know, various things for binding. So very simple presses. I know you make equipment for people. I was thinking of getting a 3D printer, but I don't know, not quite ready yet. But this kind of thing, then it's like quite cheap to produce. Sewing frames was very difficult. I was like trying to think about how to make the threads and things, but I don't know, not there yet. And presses, a number of people have tried to make their own presses, getting bolts from the local scrapyards, you know, like huge bolts that they use for, I don't know what, like building or something. And then we just like trawl along. Like they have a carpet of nuts and bolts basically in the scrapyard, and we're just looking through to see the ones that could work for a press and taking it to the carpenter. So these kind of things of like developing the tools, finding like even making local bone folders and things is something that we have been working on. It does seem like a bit more tangible and doable. So sewing frames, like the nuns have been making with their carpenter, they take a design, we find it, or I might buy something that is a simple structure and then show it to them, then they will take it to a carpenter and get it copied, and so then they have it for their bindery. Like they want to invest in those tools, and it is a possibility. So finding the alternatives for what is the word, Refilio, edge cutting. I can't think of the English word.
Oh yeah, well,
like
trimming, edge trimming. Yeah,
exactly. Things like that, like how you can do it with a sharp chisel or something, like whatever you can do. Solution for people to set up their home binderies if they can, or you know, church binderies is something we're working on. Okay, that was it.
I started my business with selling wooden tools, something like 6 years ago or something like that, and I made some bookbinding presses and some sewing frames as well. And I never did sewing frames with wooden pins. I used metal pins that are readily available, and they are easier to you know, to have access to, and so the process of making sewing frames, my process of making sewing frames was much simpler and sort of cheaper, I think. So maybe that may be an option for you and for your project, because making threaded wooden pins is a task. It's not an easy task.
Specialism.
Yeah.
Some amazing developments in 3D printing presses recently from certain binders. So there's a lot of experimentation with 3D printing, but these are not technologies that have really arrived here yet. And it's kind of like, I don't know if I should be the person to bring it. It's not necessarily going to be seen as I don't know if I should be the person bringing in that technology without in an independent way. Maybe you need to go through the proper channels, but you know, things could open up so much if you had means of manufacturing things as an individual, like rather than relying on anything outside. And there is the kind of spirit in this country, self-reliance, making everything, you know, the printing presses, the machines they maintain and keep for the last 100 years is in the spirit of independence and self-reliance. Like they had those letterpress in caves during the underground movement, churning out their materials, and then they gather them up again afterwards, and they still keep them because they know that if you can do everything manually, it's not like some kind of like, you know, frivolous artisanal, like we're just doing it because we love the heritage. Of course that's important, I'm not like, I love that, but for them it's like a very powerful, important thing that anywhere you go, you don't need to rely on any other infrastructure or any other input from the outside. You just have your, you know, your metal letters and your press and your ink that you can make somehow, and you can do anything anywhere, even if you're living in a cave. You know, they know the power of having those skills and to keep them. So yeah, it's incredible for me to be able to see it as like practical, pragmatic, everyday life, and you're like in this time warp in a way, but you know, it's amazing.
Yep. Nice.
My final speech.
Well, thank you for being with us today. If you have any links you'd like to share, please send them to me and I'll post them under the video. If you will have any links in the future related to your future projects or projects you'd like to share, please also send them to me, and I can share them through iBookBinding. That will be all. I'm sure it will be interesting to our community members. So please do that. Yeah, thank you for being with us, Pavel. Thank you for all of your questions and for also being with us. And see you next time.
Thank
Bye.
you so much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah.